On October 25th, 2000, As Told by Ginger, the most underrated Nicktoon ever made, premiered on Nickelodeon. It seems like a tradition at this point that Old School Lane would do something As Told by Ginger related. We reviewed the pilot, I talked about what the show meant to me, I did my top 20 favorite episodes, I did an analysis video on what made the show groundbreaking yet overlooked, I did my least favorite episodes, I did a video on As Told by Ginger facts, and did a virtual reunion livestream with the cast and crew to celebrate the show's 20th anniversary. But there's one As Told by Ginger project that I'm super proud of. Next to the reunion livestream, it would be the podcast We're in Between. On February 7th, 2017, Casey Reed and Ashli Wittenkeller from the Friday Night Nicktoons podcast and myself would talk about an episode of As Told by Ginger in depth every Tuesday. In addition to episode discussions, we also interviewed the cast and crew who had worked on the show every Saturday, including the creator, Emily Kapnick herself. Over the years, I get a comment from time to time saying that they still listen to We're in Between, and they miss the small but dedicated community that had been formed because they were fans of As Told by Ginger. That's awesome seeing the fan base of As Told by Ginger grow a bit in recent years, thanks to it being available to watch on Paramount Plus and Amazon Prime, especially since for a lot of people, the only way they were able to watch As Told by Ginger was through bootleg VHS recordings of the episodes on YouTube. In honor of the show's anniversary, I want to highlight 10 other podcasts that have talked about this underrated classic. Hello everyone, my name is Patricia Miranda and this is Media Hall of Fame. Here are the As Told by Ginger podcasts you should check out. The first podcast I want to highlight is Saturday Morning Cartoons. Created and hosted by Sean Paul Ellis and David Trumbore on May 4th, 2014, it's a podcast where they revisit, review, and ridicule some of the weirdest animated series. Their As Told by Ginger podcast premiered on January 23rd, 2017 as their 137th episode, making it the oldest podcast on the show we're covering for this video. Sean Paul recalls watching the show, but not leaving a big impact on him as a kid, while David had never seen the show. They covered the season 3 episode Dodie's Big Break. That's an interesting choice, considering they were going into the show blindly and watching one of the last episodes of the series with no context on the characters or the story at that point in time. I'm sure it would work for a lot of other shows, but not for As Told by Ginger. In addition to that, it's not even a good episode. That's like doing a Hey Arnold podcast by people who had vague memories on the show or had never seen it and watching Phoebe's Little Problem.
Phoebe just farted!
Anyway, they went in depth on the discussion on Dodie being determined to becoming the Pep Squad cheerleader by lying to her friends, the refreshing storyline of Dr. Dave being in Carl's life as the future stepdad, and not judging a book by its cover when Carl sees that Bud, the real estate agent, was manipulating people into buying broken down houses. The show took them by surprise and how real, grounded, and relatable it was, giving their listeners a high recommendation to check it out. They were even interested in watching more of the show to get the full context on what they saw. Unfortunately, we would never get a follow-up on that since Saturday Morning Cartoons had ended its run on November 21st, 2020, where their last episode was on the Animaniacs reboot. But they have gone off and done different things, such as Sean Paul doing stand-up comedy and David writing books. They do podcasts every now and then, but not as much as they used to. Let's hope they saw As Told by Ginger on their spare time so they can tune into the good episodes.
Yeah. Ginger now has to be the adult in the room, which did come up with one of the best lines of the entire episode that actually made me laugh out loud. So Ginger basically outsmarted this coach and just be like, you're not treating her fair and you're doing the same thing to her that people did to you back in the day, and that's not super fair either. To which the coach goes, you must be one of those AP kids, which I love. I love that so much.
The second podcast I want to highlight is Grow Up, a Saturday morning podcast, created and hosted by Robin, Kylie, and Catherine on April 29th, 2018. It's a podcast catering to nostalgic millennials looking back on the shows of their youth and discussing the lessons and themes they find. Their As Told by Ginger podcast premiered on July 21st, 2018 as their 9th episode. Each of the hosts take turns choosing on what show they wish to cover, and Catherine had Ginger as her choice. Robin had never seen it before, and Kylie had seen it, but it had been a while since she saw it. They covered 5 episodes of their discussion: Ginger the Juvie, Of Lice and Friends, Hello Stranger, Cry Wolf, and Come Back Little Seal Girl. They talked about the characters, the plot, and reflecting their real-life experiences into every episode they covered. Catherine and Kylie loved the show, talking about how it resonated with them, and Robin was very impressed with it because it treated its audience seriously with its life lessons and morals. Less than a year later, on April 15, 2019, they would release their last episode of Grow Up, with a 3-part podcast on Avatar: The Last Airbender. A very good show to end it on.
She, at the end, when she was giving her apology, she was talking about how hot-headed she had been. And, like, no,
She
like,
wasn't.
sticking to her guns is not being hot-headed. You don't have to apologize for being passionate and for being willing to put yourself through something that could be embarrassing just to, like, live your truth.
So I hope, us going forward, let's, remember our little seal girl, and even if it's stupid and it's gonna bomb, let's just do it anyways and be like, all right, we did it. It sucked, but we did it. Like, don't just back out because it's gonna suck.
The third podcast I want to highlight is CartonCast. Created and hosted by Ben Relaford and Zane Thistleford on July 4th, 2014, their goal is to watch old cartoons to see what they think of it as adults. Their As Told by Ginger podcast premiered on January 4th, 2020 as episode 143. The podcast opens in the most unique way I heard in all of the As Told by Ginger podcasts I tuned into.
As the officer led me away from the crime scene, I realized that it wasn't about what we do in our day-to-day lives. It has more to do with what we can take away. I took away that man's life.
Hey, Pumpkin, I brought you some banana bread while you're doing a stint in Sing Sing.
I guess the really important thing all along was family. Family who will come and visit you.
I gotta go right now, but I'll be back to play pool with my buddies here later.
Family who will hide a nail file inside of the banana bread.
Oh, but you do want to eat the banana bread. This is really good stuff. All right, kisses. I gotta go get Carl from the insane asylum.
Yeah, what a way to start things up. Out of all the podcasts I tune into, it's the only one I've listened to that covered the show in its entirety, as opposed to talking about one episode, several episodes, or at the most a season. They talked about their thoughts on the characters, episodes, realism, and story beats. There were some negative pointers they made, such as the character designs, not caring too much about Dodie or Macy, having mixed opinions about Ginger as the main protagonist, and episodes like And She Was Gone and A Lesson in Tightropes that didn't fit with the mostly grounded and realistic stories this show would have. Some of the positives they stated about As Told by Ginger was how the show was grounded and realistic compared to the other animated shows that were airing at the time, and how the A and B plots were so well intertwined and interesting. Overall, they were really taken back on how well the show held up. They also gave a shout out to We're In Between, which was awesome to hear. I would like to follow up with a shout out to them, since they're one of the few podcasts we're covering that is still active as of the making of this video. They just released an episode of Total Drama Island, so go check them out.
That's actually one of the things that I found was really interesting about this show is how well it kind of married the whole, yes, it's not a situation comedy, but like a cartoon that is about real life situations and still does have comedy. This is one of the best blendings I've ever seen it. It kind of reminded me of Doug in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not like it can't get wacky. It's just that the wackiness is secondary to how people feel about it.
It's pretty quarantined.
The fourth podcast is Yesterday's Capers. Created and hosted by Abdullah Molim and his producer/brother-in-law Paul on August 9, 2019, they pit two similar shows against each other and cover a few episodes of each to find out which one was the best of the two. Afterwards, they dedicate a longer discussion on a third show that is like the two they covered. Before every episode, they give facts about events, news, songs, movies, and TV shows that were airing at the time of the show they're covering to put things in perspective.
Now we're going back to October 2000. Mass demonstrations in Belgrade lead to the resignation of Slobodan Milosevic, and these demonstrations are often called the Bulldozer Revolution. 250 million US gallons of coal sludge spill in Martin County, Kentucky, and it was considered a greater environmental disaster than the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Napster and BMG Music announced a partnership that would change the website into a subscription-based service offering legal download. So
it was an illegal download site, wasn't it, before?
Napster.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like LimeWire.
I think Napster was part of that, and then I think that, and to try and get ahead of the curve or on top of it, they tried to make a legal. But I'm sure millions of people, not me, worked their way around it and used websites like LimeWire and Kazam. Meet the Parents was in the cinemas, and Black Coffee by All Saints was #1 in the charts.
They compared As Told by Ginger to Braceface and covered Daria afterwards as their 30th episode on March 20th, 2020. Neither of them had ever saw As Told by Ginger before talking about it on the podcast. Paul had talked about Summer of Camp Caprice, and Abdullah talked about Dare I Darren, And She Was Gone, No Hope for Courtney, Wicked Game, and A Lesson in Tightropes. They went over things that they found really relatable in each of the episodes they covered. They talked about the character dynamics and the grounded and realistic direction it took compared to Braceface, which was leaning a bit towards comedy, even though it had its fair share of realistic stories. This podcast discussion was unique because it's the only podcast on our list that isn't based on the United States. They're from the United Kingdom, and they were talking about how things differed compared to America, like the school systems and how grades in middle and high school were.
I don't think it was. Well, you'll be able to probably tell me what the target demographic was, but this seemed to be like for, like you said, like the year 7s, 8 and 9s, the people that are traversing a real big change in themselves.
Yeah. Young teens.
It,
this was like the young teen show.
Yeah, so it didn't kind of feel like it was like just a kids show, like as in like a
no,
going up from like your primary school or whatever it was. But so this was kind of dealing with a lot more adult. Adolescent problem.
In America it's divided, where here it's just year 7, 11, boom, high school, get on with it, and then you go to sixth form and uni. But here in America it's like, it's all kind of broken up in that sense. It's broken up from year 7 to year 9, I think, is middle school, and then year 9 to year 11 is high school.
Yeah.
Or year 10 to year 11 is high school. So,
but just like the other podcasts, they were able to find a lot of things to relate to when watching the show, and found it to be a smart, clever, and well-written show that they had slept on for so long, but glad to have discovered it. They also gave a shout out to We're in Between and the Vice article that Casey and I were interviewed in, which prompted me to contact them. I had gotten in touch with them and was involved in 2 episodes of yesterday's Capers, an interview and a discussion of Doug versus the Weekenders and Hey Arnold. I'll leave those in the description box below for you to check out. As of December 17th, 2021, they haven't posted a new episode of yesterday's Capers, with their last one being about Dash Junkies versus Turbo Dogs and Wacky Races.
It's difficult to have the talk with someone. It's difficult to... it's difficult for your parents to talk to you about it. It's difficult for you to go through it. It's difficult when, there's always the one guy at school that pretends he's the most developed person in the playground, and you feel like you're not developed. And, that whole bit is kind of really difficult time in a teenager's life, I think. And they were dealing with that time and learning about everything else. And I thought they did it really, really well.
Now to change the direction a bit in our 5th podcast is to highlight one person looking back on the show one episode at a time. We have Rewind and Rewatch, created and hosted by Kiara on May 10th, 2020, where she discusses some of her favorite childhood shows from the early 2000s, episode by episode. She would talk about every episode of the first season of As Told by Ginger from May 16th, 2020 to November 28th, 2020. She goes through the plot, characters, the lessons that she learned from the show, her own childhood and teenage experience, and highlighting a quote from a character. Some of her favorite episodes were Hello Stranger and Comeback Little Seal Girl, but she also enjoyed Cry Wolf and Summer of Camp Caprice. I think it's great that she brings up the lessons and morals she learned when watching the show, because it showcases that an animated show isn't just simply for entertainment, but something that a person can take away from that is very important to the growth and development of their own lives. After completing season 1, she never returned to cover the remaining seasons, which is a shame. If you want to see her talk more about As Told by Ginger, she did appear in our As Told by Ginger fan appreciation livestream a day before Aaron and I did the 20th anniversary virtual reunion livestream, so go check it out.
Ginger says, "I'm not nervous. I'm soaking up this powerful moment where I just take matters into my own hands and, like risk going to prison." And I think that is a great line. I have no idea why I love it so much. Probably because she's talking about being powerful and taking control of herself, even if it's for the dumbest reason ever. I still endorse that line.
Our 6th podcast to highlight is Nation of Animation, a book club podcast of all ages created and hosted by Ryan Stevens and Brooke Aaron Smith on January 9th, 2021, who cover animated shows and movies through a modern lens and celebrate what they have to offer. They covered As Told by Ginger on March 6, 2021 as their 5th episode. Brooke had loved the show when she was younger, but Ryan wasn't allowed to see it because his parents saw that the ending of the first episode, Ginger the Juvie, had Ginger stealing the enter sign from a bank. They thought it was the show promoting stealing and forbade Ryan from watching it. They went in a different direction in this podcast, where they were talking about cartoon ships and covered the episodes Never Can Say Goodbye and No Hope for Courtney. While the main ships on that episode were focusing on Darren and Miranda for Never Can Say Goodbye, there were 1 or 2 instances where they brought up the rumor that Courtney had a crush on Ginger. One of my favorite things in the podcast was when Ryan was bringing up Carl's design and compared it to other things.
There's one character design in particular that I'm just like, I do not care for this. And I know that this is entirely personal. This is Carl, Ginger's brother. I think Carl is a little nightmare of a character. I think his design is just, his gremlin-ish aura mocks me. And I have a list on my phone of things Carl from As Told by Ginger looks like. And I will now read it. Carl from As Told by Ginger looks like the Eraserhead Baby, a mascot for a team called the Name of City Placentas, a cluster of worms pretending to be a human, the souls in the river at the end of Hercules, Salad Fingers, if you know that little weird animated series from around this time.
Yeah, I know Salad Fingers.
A shaved chihuahua, a melted wax figure of Caillou, wet tofu, a reverse centaur, but with a donkey instead of a horse, a body made with non-name brand skin, all 3 Oogie Boogie kids from Nightmare Before Christmas rolled into one, a rejected Garbage Pail Kid, and sapient Vaseline. Those are all the things that I think Carl from As Told by Ginger looks like.
Another highlight was Brooke gushing over her love of Come Back Little Seal Girl and why it was her favorite episode.
So there's this episode called Come Back Little Seal Girl, and I didn't pick it because it's not like a huge Jer and Ginger episode, but the girls are in a talent show and Dodie and Ginger like drop out and Macy does it alone. And she sings this song. Oh my gosh, it's like the best song ever. It's so sad and just like, it's so good. I'll sing a little.
It's like a theme song of their favorite like cartoon about like a lovesick seal. So she's dressed as a seal.
I'm like about to cry thinking about it.
Nation of Animation is still active as of the making of this video, recently talking about a weird YouTube series called Skibidi Toilet. But if you want to hear them talk more about As Told by Ginger, I had both Ryan and Brooke, as well as Antoni Garcia, on my podcast a few years ago talking about the show and why we love it so much.
I think the way the show deals with like female adolescence and coming of age is really, really sharp and well written and well executed. Obviously it hits different for me because I'm not a girl, so I didn't have these experience, but it's still, it's handling them in a really neat way.
We're going back to season discussions with our 7th podcast, Cartoon Junkies, created and hosted by Erica and Jessica on December 8th, 2021, where 2 30-year-old African-American girls watch cartoons and discuss them with humor, nostalgia, and a little bit of judgment. They covered the first episode of As Told by Ginger on December 15th, 2021, as their 2nd episode, since it was one of Erica's favorite shows. They went over their favorite episodes, moments, characters, and life lessons. What makes this podcast discussion unique is that they're both teachers, so hearing about the characters' school experience from both their own childhoods as well as what they witnessed from their students, it was very interesting.
I have a question, and this has bothered me ever since I was a child. Mm-hmm. And now the question has come back to my mind as I was watching this week. Why are these rich kids at these damn public schools? Because wait a minute. We got Rhonda Lloyd ass in Hey Arnold. We got Courtney ass in As Told by Ginger. We got the Ashleys in Recess. Yeah. If they're so rich, I just never understood that. Why are they in these damn public schools?
I don't get it either, especially that episode where they was trying to get that senator kid to come.
Yes!
And I got a note in there about that too. Again, as teachers, we bring, I feel like, I'm sorry if y'all not teachers. Like, we said this last time, we're not going to, go into spiels because we don't know, who our listeners are. But we are teachers, and this stuff is, hella relevant. When they was trying to get, the principal was trying to, make an impression when Ginger was pretending to be Courtney so they could get the senator's son to come to that school. I'm looking at the principal why the fuck do you want a senator's kid at your school,
That's
bro?
That's a lot of pressure.
Are you joking?
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure.
Nah, fam. I was looking nah, I'm good off that. I would not want no senator's kid in my class.
Yep.
Nah.
Now you're on the spotlight. You got to do
all
everything
the time,
right.
whether you doing good or bad, all the time. No.
One minor nitpick I must bring up was when Erica was talking about Hoodsy and Deja Vu.
I was like, yo, Hoodsy's such a punk. And I was like, look at his outfit, his little polo shirt. I'm like, then I said, like, as gross as Carl and Hoodsie are, like, the new Hoodsie was kind of cornball. Like, bro, like, nah. And you was friends with Brandon. Like, come on.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, he had amnesia. That was the big focal point of that episode.
Nope, nothing.
What are you boys up to?
Well, I read smells can trigger memories too, so I figure if I can get Rob to sniff enough stuff, he'll remember Hoodsie.
Anyway, nitpicking aside, they praised the show for its theme song, being relatable, taking risks, changing their outfits, and being funnier than they remembered. By episode 5, Erica had left the show due to her life being much busier and hectic, and Jessica continued it. For about 2 episodes right before it ended on July 12, 2022, where her and special guest Cameron Cox from the Extra Butter podcast talked about the first season of The Proud Family Louder and Prouder. I take it because they're teachers, their schedule got hectic, and they probably couldn't keep up with balancing watching shows and teaching, in addition to coming up with homework assignments and tests and grading papers and living their lives. I don't blame them, since teaching is a full-time commitment.
I feel like too, let me ask you. Because you teach 5th grade, do you feel like you're more in that age group constantly, like around you?
Yes, like we can bleep these names, but what in them, like they felt like they were like my grownest, oldest 5th grade class, as far as like their personalities and all of that.
Yeah.
But like 5th grade is like that in between. Like they start off as 4th graders. You may have 1 or 2 that's like pushing 6th, and then by mid-year it's like half of them, and then by the end you ready to get rid of them because they just start acting like this. But like, yeah, like the girls now are starting this like who BS, and the boys too. Like, y'all don't sit down somewhere. Drama. But yeah, it's the drama, and yeah. To answer your question, yes.
The 8th podcast is the Anthropology of Girlhood, created and hosted by Alexa Rayhack and Michael Silvern on October 1st, 2021, where it's a girlhood podcast giving cultural community from a couple of folks who had a weird one. They covered As Told by Ginger from January 13th, 2022 to June 9th, 2022, which makes this podcast stand out compared to the rest of this list because they dedicated 10 episodes covering the entire series. However, if you're looking for an in-depth look into the characters, plot, and story progression, you're going to be a bit disappointed. This podcast goes more into their own personal experiences, ideologies, and beliefs while covering the episode's plot lines and characters. Which isn't a bad thing because it's always interesting to see what people were able to take away from a show, movie, video game, or song/soundtrack, whether they liked it or not. For this case, they loved As Told by Ginger and were happy that the show held up. It's whether you have the same agreement or have an open mind to listen to other people's opinions and perspectives that dictates whether you'll enjoy these conversations or not. For instance, Alexa and Micah are both gay and trans. I'm neither of those, but hearing their experiences growing up as different sex and genders than what they are now as adults is what makes this podcast unique. While I don't agree with some of their ideologies and beliefs, such as Alexa listening to Alex Jones, it's interesting to hear other people's take on a show or movie that you love. As of May 12, 2023, they stopped putting out new episodes of their podcast in the middle of their Disney Films retrospective, where their last film was Lilo and Stitch. There's one more thing that they brought up that caught my attention. During their discussion of the final episode, The Wedding Frame, they brought up on how much they didn't like it because of how Nikki Laporte was portrayed.
The ending with the drag.
God, do we? Okay.
It's literally the only kind of reference we can point to as queer.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you didn't watch the end of this, like, there's a whole plot about Dr. Dave's mom doing some elaborate scheme to try and break up their marriage.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's a whole thing. We could talk about that separately.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, the reveal at the end is that the woman they hired to do
the sabotage,
all the sabotage, is actually like a man in drag, which very much feels like this was in the culture.
Yeah.
In the like 90s and early 2000s of like the greatest fear is accidentally being attracted to a man.
Yeah.
Or a trans woman, heaven forbid.
Yeah, it definitely it felt really out of place.
Yeah, it felt like, where did this come from? Like, this show is so empathetic.
And it also feels like the plot line was it feels very like it was thrown in at the end, because like we wouldn't have known unless like Noelle Sussman did some weird side plot shit that like took 2 seconds and like had no other proof.
If you guys recall from my top 15 as told by Ginger's episodes, I had it in my top 3 favorite episodes, but I never considered Nikki Laporte a bad representation of a transvestite or transsexual character. To me, she was just a foil planned by Dr. Dave's mom to prevent Lois and Dr. Dave to getting married. Again, I'm not gay or trans, so I never really dug deep into it. I just focus on primarily the Ginger and Carl plots like every other episode of the series. That makes me really want to delve into this topic deeply in a video. I want to know from all of you, in the comments below, what did you think of the wedding frame and its portrayal of Nikki Laporte? I am so curious to know.
His mother's a nightmare, and she masterminds this whole plan and recruits like 5 other people just to try and break up her son's wedding, which I don't think you should meddle in other people's relationships, but even if you're going to do something like this, wouldn't it be 100 times easier to just sit down with your son and be like, hey, I don't think this is right for you. I think maybe whatever her reservations are.
Right, but her reservations are she won't have her son to control anymore.
Right, it's just that there's going to be a hard boundary that she can't.
Because Lois will put up a fight.
Exactly.
Our penultimate podcast is Whiskeylodeon, created by Ty and Sean on March 14th, 2022, where they sit and drink, reminiscing on the old shows from Nickelodeon they loved as kids. They covered As Told by Ginger on August 23rd, 2022 as their 16th episode, covering the 5th episode of the show, Of Lice and Friends, in honor of Ty's wife going back to school. What makes this podcast unique is that they have a themed alcoholic drink to go along with the show or movie they're covering. Their drink was a Jefferson's Ocean double-barreled rye whiskey, describing it as a absolute delight with a sweet marshmallow to the nose and a salty and spice flavor to the end. Despite me not caring for Of Lice and Friends at all, I'm glad to hear Sean and Ty's positive look on it because of how fun the Carl and Hoodsie plots was, mixed with the drama of Dodie using her status as the school announcer to state all the juiciest gossip in the entire school.
Dodie is chosen as a school announcement person. But these aren't just announcements, kids. This is Dodie's talk show where she brings the latest gossip, even at the cost of her friendships.
You went like psycho killer mode there.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Someone, if you're watching me, I'm blinking twice because he has a saw and goji berries. And he's not. Oh, yeah. Deep throat that goji berry.
Just like David and Paul's look back on Dodie's Big Break, even if a bad episode can get them invested in watching more As Told by Ginger episodes, it's a win. In addition to As Told by Ginger, they talked about Doug with the episode Doug and the Little Liar, mixed with theater, band names, and swearing to the point of scaring off Mormons and 6-year-olds. It'll make sense if you listen to it with the proper context. They just kicked off their 2nd season, with their newest podcast being about Jimmy Neutron. If you want to reminisce about Nickelodeon from the 90s and 2000s with a unique twist, go check it out.
And it's like, oh man, I hate to hear that, buddy. He goes, yeah, I was given like an evil shampoo and a comb to get rid of him.
You said that?
Yeah.
Evil shampoo?
An evil shampoo.
An evil shampoo.
And a comb to get him out.
I would go to a concert if the band was like called Evil Shampoo.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What band opens for them?
Five Finger Death Sponge.
Yes. We sure do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Watch out, world. You think we just had a podcast for you? No, we're opening for fucking the band that we just said. What are they called?
Evil Shampoo.
Evil Shampoo.
The final podcast I want to give a shout out to was the newest podcast as of the time of posting this video that covered As Told by Ginger, Sleepover Cinema. Created and hosted by sisters Hannah and Aubrey Leach of Two Pink Productions on September 17, 2020, Sleepover Cinema is about looking back on movies, TV shows, and music from their childhoods and recollecting their memories on them. They covered As Told by Ginger on February 2nd, 2023 as their 105th episode. In each episode of Sleepover Cinema, they cover a segment called Question for the Culture, where they would ask a question regarding pop culture. They would give facts, reviews, and the plot synopsis of the movie, show, or song that they're covering before delving into their own personal memories. For their As Told by Ginger discussion, I felt so old when learning about when they first started watching it.
As Told by Ginger premiered on October 25th, 2000 on Nickelodeon. I would have just started kindergarten. Audrey, you would have been in your first year of preschool.
In context, I was 14 years old, starting off high school when the show premiered. Anyway, the episodes they were covering were the pilot, The Party, Ginger the Juvie, And She Was Gone, A Lesson in Tightropes, and The Wedding Frame, while giving an honorable mention to Comeback Little Seal Girl. While they were very young when they first saw it, it left a huge impact on Hannah when she looked back on her journal and plagiarized the Copper-Colored Pony song from Summer of Camp Caprice as her own original song. That's adorable. They were reflecting on the show's episodes, stories, characters, and morals, and found it to be profound, relatable, and grounded. They even gave a shout out to both the We're in Between podcast and the Vice article, which was awesome. They're still active as of the making of this video, with their newest podcast being about Corpse Bride. What a coincidence, since Aaron and I just covered it for Old Spook Lane Creepy Chats as our final film for Tim Burton month. Shameless plug aside, Sleepover Cinema is a great podcast that you should check out.
The way that this show, again, so sincerely presents its characters going through things that are very relatable to kids who were our age at the time, but they weren't, it didn't feel fungicational ever. Like, it never felt like a PSA or anything. It was just very well told stories about characters you really saw yourself in. And the show made a huge impact on me.
Before we conclude, I want to give two honorable mentions. The first was the podcast Saturday Morning Cartoon Boom, created and hosted by Joseph and Chris on November 21st, 2015, where they watch and review the best and worst cartoons, both old and new. They covered As Told by Ginger on January 19th, 2018, as their 117th episode from a request from one of their patrons. The episodes they usually cover on their podcast are the first episode, the highest rated episode according to IMDb, and a random/listener pick. In this case, it was Ginger the Juvie, And She Was Gone, and the patron chose A Lesson in Tightropes. It was a really great episode where they were going into the show blindly and were pleasantly surprised on the risks that the show took to tell realistic, grounded, and thought-provoking stories with great characters. Unfortunately, not only have they ended their run on July 1st, 2023 with Denver the Last Dinosaur, but most of their podcasts have been taken down, including their As Told by Ginger podcast. So until they re-upload it or record a new episode on their podcast Nerd Sloth podcast, it's considered lost media. The second one was suggested from my longtime follower Norbert, who requested I look at YouTubers Pie Guy Rules and Shadow Streak's livestream podcast, The Awards Show Audit. Premiering on April 8th, 2021, they cover animated shows that were nominated for Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Animated Program Less Than 1 Hour from 2020 to 1990. The 3 episodes they talked about As Told by Ginger were for 2001, 2002, and 2003 with Hello Stranger, Lunatic Lake, and She Was Gone. Pie Guy Rules had seen the show in passing when he was a kid, but never sought it out because he thought it was too girly and serious, while Shadow Streak had never seen the show. Going into all 3 episodes blindly, they were very surprised at how the show was able to take risks with its storytelling, lessons, and characters. They praised And She Was Gone, didn't care too much about Lunatic Lake, and liked the Ginger story of Hello Stranger, while not caring about Carl's story, thinking it was too juvenile and childish. Before they begin their podcast, they asked the listeners on which of the episodes from each year was award-worthy. As Told by Ginger would usually be in last place, being dominated by a Simpsons, Futurama, or Powerpuff Girls episode. I guess I don't blame the listeners, since they most likely had never seen As Told by Ginger in compared to the other shows that had been nominated alongside them. But I'm glad that Pie Guy Rules and Shadow Streak enjoyed the episodes of As Told by Ginger that they saw, and hopefully it had gotten them and their listeners to tune into the show. When ranking all the episodes they covered on a tier list on what was the most award-worthy, they put And She Was Gone on major award-worthy, Hello Stranger as award-worthy, and Lunatic Lake as yikes. This will be the final video that Pie Guy Rules would release on his YouTube channel since quitting as a content creator, and Shadow Streak is still active as of the making of this video, with his recent video being about covering every single SpongeBob video game ever made.
I really couldn't imagine any other Nicktoon as of 2003 touching on this issue. Like, what, maybe the Wild Thornberries? I don't know. Like,
yeah, maybe.
But even that, probably not. She had pancreatitis once.
Wow.
Yeah. No, but like, yeah. So, and we have to talk about the representation of Ginger's poem. Okay. Mm-hmm. Black and white camera, fast moving through an empty city street with the sad girl walking through looking like the girl from The Ring, and like it's so overly dramatized. I don't think it takes away from the impact of the episode, but it is very early 2000s in a way that makes me want to go write about it on my live journal.
Oh, the soundtrack is what makes it too. That, like, semi-electro backing track. Yeah, it's so early 2000s. It's great.
That concludes our look into 10 podcasts that have covered As Told by Ginger. I'm glad that more podcasts are tuning into this show and either recollecting memories of it or tuning into it for the very first time and enjoying it. All of the podcasts have reoccurring statements and praises, which have been the theme song, the characters wearing different types of clothing, a character that they can relate to or were like in real life, the storylines and messages that were relatable, grounded, and real, and that the show was an underrated gem that should have gotten more attention when it premiered in 2000. I hope that you enjoyed this video and are interested in tuning into any of these podcasts that we covered today. But if there is an As Told by Ginger podcast that you've listened to or even hosted that wasn't mentioned on this video, let us know in the comments below and maybe we'll do a part 2 on this topic. Until next time, may these podcasts shine proudly on the Media Hall of Fame.